The entire room fell silent when the mother turned to her eldest son and said, in a tone as casual as if she were commenting on the weather, "You will never be as good as your brother." Ethan Parker froze. In that instant, the laughter, the music, the sweet scent of birthday cake all vanished, as if someone had suddenly squeezed the air out of the old wooden house in Asheville. This was Clara Parker's 62nd birthday. The living room was decorated with pale yellow ribbons, a few balloons hanging unevenly, and a cake placed at the center of the table, its white frosting already softening from the warmth. Relatives filled the room, glasses raised, conversations lively, until everything stopped at that single sentence. Ethan, the tall, slender man standing beside Olivia, his girlfriend, felt his heart pounding so hard it hurt. He was used to being compared. From the days when he was a quiet boy sitting in the corner of the room, to becoming a software engineer living all the way in Seattle, he had always been the one overlooked, underestimated, treated like a faint shadow behind his younger brother. Ryan Parker, 4 years younger than Ethan, sat across from him in a dark blue suit, his wrist gleaming with a watch expensive enough to make more than a few people their paws. He smiled, that familiar smile that had long convinced everyone that Ryan was the golden child of the family, the one who carried the burden, the source of pride. Just seconds earlier, their aunt had lifted her teacup and praised Ryan for faithfully sending money to their parents, for taking such good care of the family. Heads nodded in agreement like a quiet chorus. Then Clara, with eyes full of pride and reproach at the same time, looked straight at Ethan and said he should learn from his brother, because Ryan was the one taking care of this household. Something shattered in Ethan's chest. It was not a sudden burst of anger, but the collapse of a wall he had been holding up for his entire life. Olivia tightened her grip on his hand, feeling the cold seep into his fingers. Ethan stood up. The wooden chair scraping backward let out a sharp, grating sound, tearing through the forced warmth in the room. "If that's how it is," he said, his voice low and trembling slightly, "then from now on let Ryan handle everything. I will not send another cent." The air solidified. Harold Parker, his father, with gray hair and shoulders worn thin by years in a mechanic's shop, lifted his head, coughed lightly, and asked in a hoarse voice weakened by lung disease, "What money?" Clara spun toward Ethan, her brows furrowing. "What nonsense are you talking about? Ever since you moved away, this house has never received a single penny from you." The words struck like a blade twisting back, not only into Ethan, but into the truth that had been buried for so long. Blood rushed to Ethan's head. Under the pale yellow lights, he saw the genuine shock in his father's eyes, the irritation in his mother's, and for just a fleeting moment, a flash of panic in Ryan's gaze before it disappeared behind his familiar smile. Olivia turned to Ethan. There was no doubt in her eyes, only concern and a quiet trust. She knew he was not lying. She knew that the man being dismissed in front of everyone had carried far more than this room could imagine. Ethan took a deep breath. In his jacket pocket, his phone felt heavier than before, as if it carried 2 years of silence, 2 years of regular transfers, 2 years of sacrifices no one knew about. He did not take it out yet. Not now. But somewhere deep in that room, the truth had begun to vibrate, like a rope pulled tight to its breaking point. This birthday party, meant to be an ordinary family gathering, was quietly turning into the place where every mask was about to fall. The Asheville of Ethan's childhood was not as noisy as big cities, yet it was never truly peaceful for him. The town sat among rolling green hills, mornings often veiled in thin mist, afternoons filled with the scent of damp wood and pine needles seeping into every corner. Inside the small wooden house on Maple Street, the Parker family lived a life that looked complete from the outside, but within it, an invisible order had been set very early on. Ethan was the firstborn, delivered on a cold, rainy evening. Clara once said she was so exhausted that day she could barely cry. Harold stood silently in the hospital hallway, gripping his baseball cap tightly in his hand. Neither of them knew that the child lying in the nurse's arms would grow up with the feeling of always arriving first, yet always standing behind. 4 years later, Ryan was born, and everything changed. Ryan cried loudly, laughed freely, his eyes bright, his mouth always ready to make others smile. Clara recovered more quickly. Harold began to talk more. In Ethan's memory, the house gained more noise from that moment on, but slowly lost the quiet spaces meant for him. Ethan was a quiet child. He could sit for hours by the window watching rain slide down the glass, or turn the pages of old books without being reminded. When relatives visited, Ryan ran around the room, showing off new tricks and school stories, while Ethan stood close behind his mother, waiting for a glance, a question, any sign of attention. Most of the time, he received only a brief pat on the head, if that. Each evening Harold came home with the smell of engine oil clinging to his clothes. He rarely spoke much, but when he did, it was often to praise Ryan, saying the boy was clever, just like him when he was young. Clara would smile at that, telling neighbors that Ryan was smart, outgoing, born with leadership qualities. When asked about Ethan, she usually answered briefly, saying he was gentle, but far too shy. Those words were never meant to hurt, but they piled up day after day, like dust settling on furniture until everything was quietly covered. Ethan learned to stay silent. He learned to shrink himself, to avoid causing trouble, to avoid becoming the reason his parents' attention might drift away from Ryan. There were evenings when the family sat down for dinner and Ryan talked about being praised by teachers, applauded by classmates. Clara beamed, Harold nodded again and again. Ethan wanted to say that he had also scored well in math that day, but just as he opened his mouth, Ryan cut in with another, more exciting story. Ethan closed his lips. Not because he was sad, but because he was used to it. In his small world, Ethan slowly understood one thing. In this family, there was a star, and there was a shadow, and from a very early age, Ethan knew exactly which one he was. Ethan found his refuge at the age of 10 on a rainy afternoon when Harold brought home an old computer bought from a clearance electronics shop. The casing was scratched, the fan rattled, the screen tinted yellow. To Harold, it was just a cheap thing to give the older boy something to play with. To Ethan, it was a doorway. He unscrewed each bolt, lining them up neatly on the table, studying the circuit boards as if they were a secret map. There were no cheers, no expectant eyes watching him. Only silence, and a feeling that appeared for the first time in Ethan's life, a sense of control. Here, no one compared him to Ryan. No one told him who he should be like. Machines had no expectations and no favoritism. They simply responded to exactly what he did. Ethan began to read. Old books borrowed from the town library, black and white printouts from a painfully slow internet connection. He learned how to reinstall an operating system, how to write his first lines of code even when he did not fully understand what they meant. Each time the screen displayed a successful message, his heart raced, as if he had proven something, even if he did not know to whom. Clara did not see any of this. Whenever she passed by Ethan's room and saw her son bent over the screen, she would sigh. What good is staring at useless things all day, she would say. You should go outside and play with your brother. Ryan is practicing soccer in the yard. Harold would nod along. A boy needs to know how to socialize, how to talk. Like this, how will you ever become someone? Ethan heard everything. He nodded, shut down the computer, and went outside to stand by the field, watching Ryan kick the ball and laugh with his friends. But inside his head, lines of code were still running, circuits still connecting. He knew he did not belong in that noisy place. Little by little, he learned to hide what he loved, treating it like a private secret. That Christmas, Ethan spent weeks assembling a small LED lamp from components bought with his saved money. He carefully smoothed the plastic edges, tucked the wires away neatly, tested it again and again until the light spread evenly. In his mind, he imagined his mother smiling, his father nodding. Perhaps this time they would see him differently. But when Ethan placed the gift on the table, Clara only glanced at it, and said in a tired voice that he should spend more time playing with his brother instead of messing with useless things. Harold said nothing and kept cutting the cake. Ryan had already opened his new gift, shouting with excitement. Laughter filled the room. Ethan carried the lamp back to his room and set it on his desk. When he flipped the switch, a gentle light spread out, illuminating the old wooden wall. In that small room, there was no laughter and no praise. There was only a boy sitting for a long time before that light, understanding for the first time that some wounds do not bleed, yet ache all the way to the bone, and from that night on, Ethan learned how to endure in silence. High school did not open a new door for Ethan the way people often said it would. It only stretched the old hallway longer, a place where he walked in silence, watching other doors glow with light, knowing for certain he did not belong behind any of them. Asheville High sat on a hillside, mornings filled with students pouring in like a tide, afternoons spilling back out just as quickly. Ethan moved through that crowd with the constant feeling of being invisible. Ryan was the opposite. From the very first year, he became the center of attention. He played basketball, joined the hosting team, appeared on stage whenever the school held an event. The cheers were so familiar that Ethan could predict the rhythm of the applause without even looking. Teachers called Ryan's name with smiles, classmates gathered around him like planets orbiting a bright star. Ethan sat in the library instead. He liked the smell of old books and the steady hum of the air conditioner. He liked the computer lab with its outdated but honest machines. There, he wrote his first lines of code for a small project in the robotics club, a model car that could navigate on its own using sensors. No one cheered when it worked correctly, but Ethan smiled quietly. Once, during a parent-teacher meeting, the homeroom teacher told Clara that Ethan did fine academically but was far too quiet, that being more outgoing like his younger brother would be better. Clara nodded and took note. That same day, Ryan was praised in front of everyone for his leadership spirit. Ethan sat at the back of the room, his hands clenched, feeling as if another stone had been placed on his chest. By his second year, Ethan decided to try stepping out of the shadows just once. He joined the school's science fair. His group was chosen to present their autonomous vehicle project to the entire school. Ethan practiced speaking in front of the mirror night after night. His voice trembled, but every sentence was carefully prepared. There was only one thought in his mind this time: his parents would see him. The day of the fair arrived in the large auditorium. Ethan stood on stage, the lights shining directly into his eyes. He looked toward the front row. Empty. His heart sank, but he continued. He spoke about circuits, about algorithms, about how the vehicle learned from its mistakes. When he finished, there were a few polite rounds of applause. Ethan bowed his head. That evening, Clara said she was busy watching Ryan compete. Next time, remember to tell us earlier. Harold simply nodded. Ryan showed off his new medal. No one asked Ethan how his presentation had gone. That night, Ethan lay staring at the ceiling as streetlight filtered through the window. He did not cry. His emotions had worn thin after too many times. But in that silence, a decision slowly took shape. If he stayed here, he would always be just a shadow. So he would go somewhere else, not to be praised, but simply to be himself. Atlanta welcomed Ethan with sweltering heat and a relentless pace. The city waited for no one, and strangely enough, that made him feel relieved. Here, no one knew he was Ryan Parker's older brother. No one asked what his sibling did or how impressive he was. On the vast campus of Georgia Tech, Ethan was simply a first-year computer science student, carrying an old backpack and a cautious gaze, and for the first time, that did not make him lesser in anyone's eyes. Wide lecture halls, laboratories lit through the night, the faint smell of metal and lightly burned plastic from test circuits, all of it unfolded before him like a different world. Here, the right answer did not depend on who spoke louder, but on whether the system ran or not, whether the code worked, whether the circuit closed. It was a world that was coldly fair, and Ethan loved it. He studied like he never had before, spending long nights in front of the screen, typing line after line of code until his wrists ached. When his first program ran smoothly, when the final algorithm produced the correct result, Ethan sat still, his heart pounding. There was no applause, no one watching, but in that moment, he knew he was not invisible. Ethan worked part-time to cover his expenses. He studied during the day, assisted in the computer lab at night, and washed dishes on weekends at a small restaurant near the dorms. The money was not much, but every dollar meant freedom. He did not have to ask anyone, did not have to bow his head. There were times he was so exhausted he fell asleep at his desk, yet every morning he woke up feeling that he was moving forward. Back home, the story was different. Ryan had enrolled in a college near Asheville, but before long he began complaining that the environment was too restrictive, unsuitable for someone with big vision. He talked about business ideas, about projects that would change his life. Over the phone, his voice was full of confidence. Clara listened with fascination. Harold sounded proud, saying the boy dared to think big and take risks. Ethan heard those stories through brief phone calls. He did not comment. When he mentioned that he had just been selected to join a small research group in his department, there was a short pause on the other end before Clara said that was good, that he should focus on studying and remember to eat properly. The call ended. Ethan stared at the dark screen reflecting his own face. A familiar feeling crept in, but this time it no longer carried the same weight, because Ethan was beginning to understand that his worth did not live in anyone else's gaze. One late evening, as he stepped out of the lab, cool night air brushing his face, the city of Atlanta glowing in the distance, Ethan stopped and took a deep breath. For the first time in his life, he allowed himself to think that maybe, just maybe, he was on the right path. He did not need to be Ryan. He did not need to be better than anyone. He only needed to be strong enough to keep moving forward. By his second year of college, the distance between Ethan and his family was no longer measured in miles, but in short phone calls and financial decisions made without ever asking his opinion. He first felt it one late evening, sitting in the shared dorm kitchen, eating cold noodles. Clara's voice came through the phone, lowered as if she were sharing a secret. "I just sent Ryan some money. He needs it to keep his new project going. It's a big opportunity." Ethan stayed silent, staring at the bowl in front of him, the broth gone, the noodles clumped together. He asked quietly, "How much was it, Mom?" "Not much," Clara replied quickly. "Just savings. Don't worry about it." Ethan knew what not much meant. It was money Clara had set aside over many years, hours of overtime, long exhausting shifts. But Ryan needed it, and that was enough. A few weeks later, Ethan felt the consequence of that choice. He needed to buy an advanced programming textbook, a required book for a new course. He called home, his voice careful, as if afraid of shattering something fragile. "Mom, I'm a little short on money to buy a book." There was silence on the other end for a few seconds, then Clara sighed. "Things are a bit tight right now, Ethan. I just helped Ryan. You'll have to manage. You're grown up now." The call ended. Ethan set the phone down and sat there for a long time without moving. In his mind appeared the image of Ryan smiling, talking about vague projects and unnamed opportunities, while here Ethan was counting every dollar to buy a book that would help him study better. He did not feel resentment. That emotion had worn thin. In its place came a quiet decision. Ethan asked for more shifts. He fixed computers for students in the dorm. He sold his old music player. Every dollar he earned had a clear purpose. No glamour. No illusion. Meanwhile, Ryan began appearing more often on social media, photos at brightly lit bars, photos with a new car, status updates about big beginnings and wide-open futures. Clara bragged to neighbors that Ryan was doing well. Harold nodded along, his eyes full of hope. Ethan looked at those photos on the cracked screen of his old phone late at night, when the lab was empty. Something did not add up, but he pushed the thought away. He did not want to doubt his brother, did not want to become the villain in his family's story. Instead, Ethan buried himself in his studies. He earned high grades and was accepted into a small internship project in his department. When he called to share the news, Clara only said it was good and reminded him to take care of his health. There was no excitement, no follow-up questions. Ethan ended the call and stood alone in the long hallway of the academic building, pale fluorescent lights washing over the cold tiled floor. In that moment, he realized a truth that was painfully clear. This family had placed its bet on Ryan, and Ethan, no matter how hard he tried, was always seen as the backup plan. And if that was the case, Ethan told himself, he would not wait to be chosen anymore. He would walk his own path, without spotlights, without applause, only a road solid enough that he would never have to turn back. Seattle welcomed Ethan with light rain and an endless stretch of gray sky. The city promised nothing, yet it gave him something far more valuable, the chance to stand firmly on his own feet. The tech company where Ethan worked occupied a high floor, glass walls overlooking the cold bay. Every morning he brewed black coffee, powered up his computer, and sank into a world of smoothly running lines of code. Here, he was not anyone's son, not Ryan's older brother. He was Ethan Parker, a software engineer paid to solve problems. He lived frugally. A small apartment, minimal furniture, dinners often made up of reheated rice or instant noodles. Every expense was carefully recorded, not out of stinginess, but because he wanted to finish paying off his student loans and build a solid foundation. Stability, to Ethan, was a luxury that had to be earned. The call from Asheville came on a night of heavy rain. Clara's voice sounded more tired than before. "Your father has been coughing a lot lately. The doctor says he should not do heavy work anymore. I asked to switch to part-time to ease the pressure. Our income has dropped quite a bit, Ethan." He sat in silence, watching raindrops slide down the window. He pictured Harold's thin shoulders, the noisy repair shop, the smell of engine oil clinging to his clothes. He pictured Clara calculating each bill late into the night. No one needed to say more. Ethan understood. That evening, he opened his spreadsheet and reviewed every expense. He decided to send money home each month. No long explanations, no announcements. Just something that needed to be done. The first transfer went through, then the next. A steady amount, enough to cover medicine and daily needs. Ethan did not wait for thanks. He only hoped they would worry less. The problem appeared quickly. Clara was not comfortable using banking apps. Every time Ethan mentioned direct transfers, she sighed and said it was too complicated, that she was afraid of making a mistake. Ethan thought of Ryan. His younger brother still lived in Asheville, close to their parents, familiar with the local bank. The idea came naturally, like a reasonable shortcut. Ethan called Ryan and explained it simply. He would transfer the money to Ryan's account, and Ryan would withdraw cash and give it to their parents for him. Ryan agreed immediately, his voice bright and enthusiastic, saying it was no problem at all, that he would take care of it, that they were family. Ethan trusted him. Even though he was grown, even though he had noticed vague things in Ryan's stories, he still trusted him. Because Ryan was his brother. Because deep down, Ethan still wanted to believe that family was a place where no one needed to be on guard. In the months that followed, the transfers went out regularly. Ethan did not ask many questions. He did not want to make his parents feel awkward, and he did not want Ryan to think he was being monitored. He imagined Clara using the money to buy Harold's medicine, to fix the leaking roof, to ease one more worry. Life in Seattle went on. Busy workdays, long meetings, late nights. Through it all, Ethan carried a fragile sense of reassurance. He believed he was doing the right thing. What he did not know was that, at the same time, another story was quietly being written in Asheville, and the trust he placed in Ryan was slowly, piece by piece, being used for a completely different purpose. At first, everything seemed normal. The short calls from his mother continued as usual, Clara's voice always carrying the familiar mix of fatigue and worry. "Your father's medicine has gotten so expensive lately, Ethan." Then the roof started leaking again after that heavy rain. Each time, Ethan did not ask many questions. He simply increased the amount he sent. 2,300, then 2,600, some months nearly 3,000. He cut back on the few dinners out he allowed himself, skipped gatherings with coworkers. He told himself it was the right thing to do. But something did not feel right. While his mother kept complaining about money being tight, Ryan began appearing on social media more and more often. Photos taken in front of bars glowing with blue and red lights. A brand new sports car parked by the curb. The watch on Ryan's wrist changing styles again and again. Short, confident status updates talking about a booming phase, about daring to take risks to change one's life. Ethan stared at those images late at night, when his apartment in Seattle was silent except for the sound of rain. A vague feeling rose inside him, not clear enough to name, but sharp enough to make him uncomfortable. He wondered, if Ryan was truly doing so well, why their parents still struggled with every bill. He pushed the thought aside. It was not the first time he chose trust over doubt. Family, after all. His younger brother. One evening, while reviewing his account to prepare for paying rent, Ethan happened to glance at Ryan's transfer history. A strange transaction appeared in an automatic notification, the name of an obscure investment platform Ethan had never heard of. He paused. Just for a second. Then he turned off the screen. It could be a coincidence. It could be Ryan's own money. Ethan did not want to dig deeper. But the unease began to creep into his quietest moments. When his mother called, her voice heavy because the electricity bill had gone up. When his father coughed more often over the phone. When Ryan bragged about a short trip without explaining why. Pieces that did not quite fit began pressing into Ethan's mind. He started keeping notes of the amounts he sent, more carefully than before. Not to control anything, but to reassure himself. Over 2 years, the total had grown so large that even he was startled by it. It was sweat, sleepless nights, sacrifices no one knew about. Ethan wondered if one day his parents learned what he had done, would they see him differently? The thought felt strange. He did not send money to be recognized, but he did not do it to be forgotten either. In Seattle, work kept him busy, yet whenever he had a moment, his eyes returned to Ryan's photos on the screen. The trust that had once felt solid began to show thin cracks. Small, but enough to signal that if a truth was being hidden, it would not stay buried forever. Olivia entered Ethan's life on a midday that seemed entirely ordinary. She sat down in the chair across from him in the company cafeteria, set her tray down, smiled, and asked if he minded her joining him. It was a simple question, yet it made Ethan pause for a few seconds, as if he had grown too used to no one truly noticing his presence. Olivia worked in the marketing department. She spoke calmly, her eyes focused when she listened, never interrupting, never rushing to give advice. Ethan noticed that from their very first conversations. When he talked about a system bug that had plagued him for 2 days straight, Olivia did not pretend to understand, but she did not look bored either. She asked the right questions, and strangely, Ethan found himself talking more than usual. After work, coffee breaks became a habit, followed by simple dinners in Ethan's small apartment, where Olivia sat on a kitchen chair, eating while listening to him talk about his childhood in Nashville. Ethan had never told that story in full to anyone before, but with Olivia, the words came naturally, as if they had been waiting for the right person. He told her about Ryan, about being compared, about swallowing his feelings in silence, about sending money home through his younger brother as a duty that required no recognition. Olivia did not react strongly. She simply listened, sometimes frowning slightly, sometimes letting out a very soft sigh. When Ethan finished, the room fell quiet. Outside the window, Seattle rain fell steadily. Olivia placed her hand over his and spoke gently but firmly. "You are doing a very good thing, but you need to be more careful. Your parents should clearly know who is helping them, and money, especially within a family, needs transparency." Ethan shook his head. He did not want things to become complicated. He did not want to be seen as showing off, and he especially did not want Ryan to feel suspected. He had lived his whole life as the one standing behind, and stepping forward felt unfamiliar. Olivia looked at him for a long moment. There was no reproach in her eyes, only concern. "You trust people too easily, Ethan. Not everyone is like you." That sentence stayed with him for a long time, especially as Ryan's glamorous images continued to appear on his phone screen, as his mother kept complaining about money, as his expense spreadsheet grew thicker by the day. One evening, Olivia brought over a stack of papers. She said it was just a professional habit. She helped him list all the transfers, the dates, laying them out like a clear timeline. Ethan stared at the numbers written out in words, stretching across page after page. For the first time, he saw the full weight of his sacrifices laid bare. Olivia did not force him to do anything. Before leaving, she said only one thing. If you do not protect yourself, no one will do it for you. A few days later, Ethan received a message from his mother. My birthday is coming up soon. Can you come home? He read the line again and again. A feeling of both hope and unease rose inside him. He decided he would return to Asheville, not just for the birthday, but to finally face the truth he had been avoiding for the past 2 years. The flight back to Asheville carried Ethan away from the familiar gray skies of Seattle and back to the deep green hills and winding roads of his childhood. Sitting by the window, he watched the clouds drift slowly, a heaviness settling in his chest as if he were carrying an unnamed past with him. Olivia held his hand, her fingers warm, silent yet steady. She promised nothing. She was simply there. The wooden house on Maple Street appeared after a bend in the road, its porch chipped, its steps worn smooth by time. In the yard, pale blue hydrangeas were in bloom, the flowers Clara once said she loved because they endured the rain so well. Ethan stepped out of the car and took in a deep breath of damp earth. The feeling of coming home was both familiar and strangely distant. Clara looked thinner than he remembered. She hugged Ethan, then turned to embrace Olivia, her smile friendly but cautious. Harold sat in an armchair near the window, coughing lightly, his eyes tired yet brightening when he saw his son. Ethan bent down and took his father's hand. It was cold and dry, and the sensation sent a quiet ache through him. Ryan appeared last, stepping out of the kitchen with practiced confidence. His suit fit perfectly, his hair neatly styled, his wrist catching the light. He clapped Ethan on the shoulder, laughed loudly, tossed out a few familiar jokes. Clara's gaze passed over Ethan and lingered longer on Ryan, a reflex carved in deep over the years. The living room gradually filled. Relatives arrived with laughter and familiar questions. Olivia blended in quickly, talking about her work, about Seattle, about creative projects. Ethan watched her and felt his chest ease, but the center of attention shifted as it always did. An aunt sipped her tea and turned to Ryan, admiration in her voice. You really are the backbone of this family. Sending money home every month so faithfully. The whole room nodded. Clara smiled, pride shining in her eyes. Harold said nothing, but his face softened. Ethan felt his heartbeat change. Olivia squeezed his hand gently beneath the table. He looked at Ryan. The smile was still there, smooth, unbroken. Clara turned to Ethan, her voice gentle yet sharp. You should learn from your brother. He's the one taking care of this family. You're always far away. What would you know? The words fell clean and cold. For a moment, Ethan heard every breath in the room, the clink of a spoon against a plate, the soft brush of a balloon against the ceiling. A familiar feeling surged up, then vanished, replaced by something harder. Olivia tilted her head toward him, her eyes searching his face. Ethan drew in a slow breath. He said nothing, but in his mind, every piece fell neatly into place, the complaining phone calls, the glamorous photos, the figures Olivia had helped him write down. On the surface, the birthday party went on. The cake was brought out. Candles were lit. Everyone waited for a wish. Ethan stood there, in the room of his childhood, feeling as though he were standing at the edge of a cliff. He knew that with just one more step, everything would change, and he was not sure anyone in that room was ready for what would follow. Ethan stood up before anyone could cut the cake. The wooden chair slid lightly across the floor, its dry scraping sound cutting through the crowded living room. All eyes turned toward him, some surprised, some irritated, some waiting for the familiar apology. But this time, Ethan did not lower his head. If that's what everyone thinks, he said slowly, each word landing clearly, then from now on let Ryan handle everything. I will not send any more money. The air froze. Harold raised his eyebrows, coughed lightly, and asked in a wavering voice, What money, Ethan? Clara spun toward her eldest son, her expression a mix of irritation and confusion. What are you talking about? Ever since you moved to Seattle, this house has never received a single dollar from you. The words hit the room like a hammer. A few relatives began to whisper. An aunt frowned. Olivia felt Ethan's hand turn ice cold in hers. Ethan looked at his mother, then at his father. Under the pale yellow lights, he saw the genuine shock in their eyes, no acting, no pretending. His heart tightened. For a brief moment, he wondered if he had done something wrong. Then he saw Ryan. Ryan sat perfectly still, the smile on his face stiffening for a split second, so fast it might have been missed, but not by Ethan. Something flashed in Ryan's eyes. Fear. Ethan let out a long breath. He took his phone from his pocket, not hurried, not angry, just exhausted. His fingers opened the banking app and slowly scrolled through the transaction history, each line appearing like a clean, precise cut. He stepped forward and held the screen out in front of Clara. $2,300 each month, some months $2,600, some nearly $3,000, stretching across 2 years, all transferred into Ryan's account, with notes for Mom and Dad. Ethan's voice was strangely calm. I have been sending money regularly for 2 years. I asked Ryan to withdraw it and give it to you. Everyone says I do not care. Then what is this? The room went completely silent. Clara's mouth fell open, her trembling hand reaching toward the phone as if afraid it might disappear. Harold straightened in his chair, his expression shifting from weariness to shock. Ethan, his voice rough, is this true? Whispers rippled through the room. The aunts stared at Ryan. An uncle set his cup down on the table with more force than necessary. Ryan lowered his head. His shoulders stiffened. The laughter was gone. The confidence was gone. Only heavy silence remained. Olivia stood up. Her voice was not loud, but it was clear. Ethan has worked day and night to send money home for this family. He did not talk about it because he did not want anyone to feel uncomfortable. But the truth is, he has carried far more than anyone here realizes. She looked around the room, then straight at Ryan. And clearly, there is something that has not been said. The ceiling light shone down, revealing faces as they changed one by one. The praise that had been showered on Ryan moments earlier now sounded hollow. The birthday party still had cake on the table, candles still burning low, but no one remembered them anymore. The truth had been placed in the open, and no one in that room could pretend not to see it. No one spoke for several suffocating seconds. The only sounds were Harold's heavy breathing and the soft brush of a balloon against the ceiling. Clara kept staring at the phone screen in Ethan's hand, as if the lines of text were written in a language she had never learned. She turned to Ryan, her voice trembling. You told me that money was from you. You said you were the one taking care of your parents. Ryan did not lift his head. His hands clenched tightly around his knees, sweat beading at his temples. The room waited for an explanation, but Ryan remained silent, the silence of someone cornered. Harold spoke, his voice low and tired. Speak, Ryan. What is this about? Ryan took a deep breath, as if gathering all the air in the room just to form the next sentence. I only borrowed it at first. That's how it started. The words fell softly, but they cut sharp. Clara shook her head in disbelief. Borrowed it? What do you mean? Ryan looked up, his face flushed, his eyes avoiding Ethan. I kept most of the money Ethan sent. I only gave you and Dad a little, a few hundred each month. Just enough so you would think I was the one taking care of things. The rest spilled out like a broken dam. Ryan talked about debts, about bad investments, about platforms that promised fast profits that he rushed into to prove he was successful. Money went in first, results never followed. Debt piled on debt, and eventually Ethan's money became his last lifeline. I didn't want you to be disappointed in me, Ryan said, his voice choking. I didn't want anyone to think I was a failure. No one answered right away. The truth lay there, bare, needing no more explanation. Ethan stood still, the feeling in his chest not exploding as he once imagined, but turning cold, and deep. 2 years of work, 2 years of saving, 2 years of trust, reduced to props in someone else's performance. He looked at Ryan, searching for the little brother who once chased him around the backyard, who shared a cookie with him. But the person in front of him was someone else, someone who had chosen deception to protect an image, no matter the cost. Clara broke down in tears. She covered her face, her shoulders shaking. I didn't know. I had no idea. Her voice cracked. I thought Ryan was the one taking care of this family. Harold lowered his head, his hands resting on his knees. When he looked up, his eyes held no anger, only a heavy disappointment. What have you done to your brother, Ryan? Olivia stepped forward and stood beside Ethan. Her voice was gentle but firm. Ethan never wanted this to happen. He only wanted his parents to live with less worry. But from now on, everything has to be clear. Ethan closed his eyes for a brief moment. When he opened them, one truth was unmistakable. The most painful thing was not the truth that had just been spoken, but how long he had stayed silent, allowing others to write his story for him. Ryan bowed his head deeply. I'm sorry, brother. I was wrong. The apology hung in the air. Ethan heard it, but he knew that from this moment on, nothing could return to how it was. The truth had spoken, and this family, whether they wanted to or not, would have to face it. Ethan took a deep breath, feeling as though he had to gather every last bit of strength drained by years of silence. He looked around the room, once the setting of his childhood, of meals filled with laughter but also with constant comparison. Now every eye was on him. He was no longer a shadow, no longer the one standing behind. I never wanted this to happen like this, Ethan said, his voice low and slow, but clear. I only wanted you to live with less hardship. But what just happened makes me say something I never dared to say before. Clara looked up, her eyes red and swollen. She tried to speak, but Ethan raised his hand, gentle yet firm. This time, he did not step back. I will continue to help you, he said, but I have conditions. The room fell silent. First, Ethan looked straight at his mother, then at his father. I do not want to be compared to Ryan anymore. I have lived my entire life under that comparison. I am tired. I am Ethan, not a lesser version of anyone else. Clara lowered her head, tears dropping onto the back of her hand. Harold nodded slowly, as if each of Ethan's words pressed heavily on his chest. Second, Ethan continued, from now on, all money must be transparent. I will send it directly to you or pay the bills myself. No middleman. I need to know my money is used where it should be. Ryan shifted slightly, but said nothing. And third, Ethan turned to his brother. Ryan must take responsibility too. If you want to be part of this family, you need to contribute with actions, not promises or appearances. His voice was not loud, but each sentence landed like a solid stone set firmly into the floor. Ethan felt a small but unmistakable change. The air in the room grew less suffocating, even though the pain was still there. Clara wiped her face, her voice trembling. I am sorry, Ethan. I was wrong to always compare you to your brother. I thought it was good for the family. I did not see how much you were enduring. Harold spoke next, his voice hoarse but steady. I was wrong too. I did not see you. From now on, things will be different. Ryan lifted his head. His face looked worn, the confident mask gone. I know I was wrong. I cannot make big promises, but I will work. I will send money regularly. I will help Mom and Dad with real actions. I do not want to lose this family. Ethan looked at Ryan for a long moment. He did not feel the surge of anger he once imagined. Only a deep exhaustion, and a strange sense of relief. At least everything had been said. Olivia squeezed Ethan's hand and gave him a faint smile. She said nothing, but her eyes told him he had done the right thing, not because he had won, but because he had finally protected himself. The birthday party ended in silence. No one mentioned the cake or empty wishes anymore. But as Ethan prepared to leave, Clara hugged him tightly, longer than ever before. My son, she whispered, for the first time without comparison. Just two simple words, yet to Ethan, they weighed as much as a lifetime of waiting. After that birthday party, no one said that everything was fine. But one thing had changed forever. The silence that had lasted for many years in the Parker family was finally broken, and this time, it did not return. Ethan went back to Seattle with Olivia on a chilly morning. The city was still gray, the rain still falling steadily, but inside him was a very different feeling. Not complete relief, not pain anymore either. It was the feeling of someone who had just stepped out of a shadow that had covered him for far too long. He continued sending money home, but in a new way. A joint account was opened. Every expense was clear. At first, Clara struggled with the smartphone and often complained that it was complicated, but little by little she learned. Each time she received the money, she called back to confirm, her voice full of gratitude but no longer heavy with guilt. What surprised Ethan the most was the change in how his parents spoke to him. Clara began asking about his work, about what projects he was working on, why he had to stay up late. Harold, despite his failing health, proudly told neighbors that his eldest son was a software engineer in Seattle. Those words came late, but they were no longer overshadowed by comparison. Ryan changed more slowly. After the night the truth came out, he disappeared from social media. No more photos of cars, no more brightly lit bars. A few weeks later, Ryan called Ethan, his voice tired but sincere. "I found a job at an auto repair shop. It's not big, but it's enough to live on. I'll send money regularly to Mom and Dad." Ryan kept his word. Not much, but consistent. More importantly, he began spending more time at home, taking Harold to medical appointments, fixing the old fence, helping Clara with groceries. Small things, with no applause, but for the first time in many years, Ryan did not need to perform. Ethan's life continued to open up as well. He was promoted and began leading a team of young engineers. Olivia was always by his side, quiet but steady. 1 year later, they held a small wedding on the outskirts of Seattle. No extravagance, no display, only people who truly wished them well. During the ceremony, Ethan saw his parents smiling without looking toward Ryan for comparison. For the first time, that gaze was meant only for him. Years passed, and the Parker family did not become perfect. But they learned to speak honestly, to see each other as separate individuals, not as roles to be played. Ethan no longer needed to prove anything. He was enough. Looking back on the journey from a silent boy in Asheville to a man who knew how to set boundaries for himself, Ethan understood one thing. A family is truly a place to return to only when each person is recognized for their true value. Without fairness, love becomes a wound. But when the truth is spoken, even the deepest cracks have a chance to heal. If you have ever lived with the feeling of being overlooked, of carrying burdens in silence while no one knew, share your story. Perhaps your truth is also waiting to be spoken. And if Ethan's journey resonated with you, do not forget to leave a comment, a like, and follow along so we can continue sharing stories of growth, fairness, and healing together.